Prynawn da, chroeso i sesiynau adolygu Carlam Cymru. Bydd y sesiwn yma yn canolbwyntio ar Cymraeg a Iaith, lefel A Cymraeg a Iaith, ac yn cael ei redeg gan Siona Farina Childs o Ysgol Aberpennar. Bydd y sesiwn yn para tua 3/4 awr, lle bydd yr athro yn mynd drwy'r cynnwys perthnasol. Os oes gennych unrhyw gwestiynau, defnyddiwch yr adran holi ac ateb, a byddwn yn ymdrechu i ateb eich cwestiwn yn ystod y sesiwn. Bydd y sesiwn yn cael ei recordio gyda'r recordiad a'r adnoddau perthnasol yn cael ei uwchlwytho ar wefan e-sgol dan adran Carlam Cymru.
Okay, prynhawn da pawb. Good afternoon, everyone, and croeso I session Iaith, and welcome to the second language session today. Today's session, we are going to revise techniques. So things, techniques such as metaphors, personification in Welsh, because as part of your Unit 6 exam, so remember you'll have a speaking, which is your Unit 4, another reading exam, writing exam, which is Unit 5, and this one today is going to be focusing on Unit 6. So you'll be given a piece of text from one of the short stories, and you'd have to analyse some of the short stories with techniques. This is also building on some of your previous knowledge from AS as well. So remember, you have to analyse quite a few techniques in the poetry questions, and as well is also going to apply to other aspects of the course. So for example, you may want to analyse or use point evidence explain in terms of the synoptic question as well in Unit 6. Then we're going to compare a model answer against the marking criteria, and finally hopefully we'll have time to prepare our responses to a Unit 6 past paper question. So just to remind you, in Unit 6, Section A is based on grammar sessions, which was from our first session that we ran a few weeks ago. Then they would expect you to write an extended piece of writing, so it could be a letter, it could be a blog. Then Section B, which we're focusing on today, you'll have to write a response to one of the short stories. So remember, the exam board has made some changes, so you're only studying 3 short stories at the moment: Angladd and Alad, Pwy fe fyddai'n feddwl, a Beth Os, okay? So in that exam paper, they could ask you questions about the content of the story, and they could ask you questions about the techniques, which we're going through today, and again, it'll finally be a synoptic question. So today we're just focusing on the techniques question. So the second question they could ask you in Section B. So the exam board would expect you to analyse a piece of extract from the exam paper. So they would give you a piece of extract, and they expect you to write 100 words in your responses. So what you should do is only discuss the techniques in the question. So if they ask in the question, maybe trafodwch, discuss, trosiad, metaphor, personification, ymdroddion, negyddol, negative phrases, then they'd only expect you to discuss those. I just had a brilliant question just asked. Could we talk about maybe other techniques? Only talking about the techniques in the question, which we'll be going through in a few minutes. You could say this verb suggests something, or this simile shows that. That's fine, but if you end up talking about the other techniques, you will lose marks, okay? So your first task today, I want you to tell me beth ydy Saesneg. So what are these techniques in English? I'm going to give you 5 minutes. Remember, I'm not expecting you to know all of them. You might remember 1 or 2 from last year or throughout the course. Remember, type in the chat if you need any help with anything. Okay, so rhestru, cyflwyfreni, enwau, gwrthgyferbyniad. You would have heard that especially in the story in Patagonia from last year. Epgoriad, trosiad, cyfelebiaeth, cwestiynau rhetoregol, ferf, dialog, ansoddeiriau, symbolaidd, personoli, person cyntaf, ailadrodd, eirony, defnydd o Saesneg, brawddegau byrion, trydydd person, amrywiaeth yn hyd I llinellau. Okay, so the reasons why I want you to know about these is because all of the questions in the exam are in Gymraeg, are in Welsh. So if you didn't know what the techniques were, then you would struggle analysing the text. Okay, so if we say un funud, and I just had a question in the text, and it asks, beth ydy epgoriad? So an epgoriad is ellipsis, which is ... So it could show tension or maybe some sort of fear from a character in the short stories. And remember, if you are finishing, you might know some more techniques in Welsh. So feel free to share those in the chat. And remember, you can also recycle some of these terms in order to maybe analyse the drama Crash in your speaking exams in a few weeks' time. You might want to recycle these as part of your synoptic analysis. Okay, so if we go dros yr atebion, so rhestru is list, cyflwythrennu, alliteration, enwau, nouns, gwrthgyferbyniad, contrast, epgoriad, ellipsis, trosiad, metaphor, cyfelebiaeth, similarly, cwestiynau rhetoregol, rhetorical question, verb, verb, dialogue, ansoddeiriau, adjectives, symbolaeth, symbolism, personoli, personification, person cyntaf, first person, ailadrodd, repetition, irony, defnydd o Saesneg, use of English, brawddegau byrion, short sentences, trydydd person, third person, amrywiaeth y hyd I llinellau, a variation of lines. So that means maybe going from longer sentences to short sentences. Okay, so again, the reason why we've gone through this is because a lot of these are Welsh only. If you didn't know the meaning of the words, then you'd struggle finding examples from the text. So feel free to type in your marks in the chat. Okay, gwych, da iawn. I can see a lot of people are gaining full marks from this task, so the da iawn, ardderchog. Okay, so a task now, I want you to cysylltwch y Gymraeg a Saesneg. So I'm going to give you about 3 minutes to connect the English to the Welsh. So these are sentence starters, which you could recycle for your responses. I know you have developed a lot of knowledge from your own teachers or maybe your course from last year to recycle any useful sentence starters that you might have used in the poetry and any maybe mock papers that you completed this year. So it's all relevant, it's just building on your knowledge. Okay, so remember, type in the chat if you need any help with anything. So mae awdur yn defnyddio. Have a think, what does that connect with? Yn y testun mae. Fel. Enghraifft. Mae hyn yn dangos. Defnydd ailadrodd. So that is the technique that we just went over. And again, you could change the technique according to the question. Mae dechneg yn gyfleu. Mae rhywbeth aneffeithiol, so mae something aneffeithiol iawn. Mae awdur yn defnyddio gwahanol dechnegau, megis. Mae'n amlwg bod. Mae awdur yn llwyddiannus achos. Mae hyn yn ychwanegu at. Okay, so remember, type in the chat if you have any questions or if you need any help with anything. Okay, so if we say un funud now, 1 more minute. Work out the ones you know first and hopefully work your way backwards to the ones that you are not sure of. Okay, I just had a question in the chat. Beth ydy defnyddio ailadrodd? So the ailadrodd is repetition, okay? So repetition is being used. So you might want to use that to introduce your techniques that you're talking about in the text. Okay, gwych. Remember, type in the chat if you need any help with anything. Okay, so if we mynd dros y atebion now. So remember, ticiwch yn adre, tick at home. So mae awdur yn defnyddio, the author is using, and a testyn mae. So these are useful patterns that you could introduce the examples from the text. Fel, like, yr enghraifft, for example. Again, you can use these to show examples from the text. Mae hyn yn dangos, this is showing. So again, is explaining your work further. Defnyddio ailadrodd, repetition is being used. Mae techneg yn gyfleu, the technique is conveying. Mae something yn effeithiol iawn. So something is effective. It's very effective. Mae awdur yn defnyddio gwahanol technegau fel. So the author uses different techniques such as. So that could be a good introductory line to start your piece of work. Mae'n amlwg bod, it's obvious that. Mae awdur yn llwyddiannus achos. So the author is successful. You could say aflwyddiannus, so unsuccessful. Mae hyn yn ychwanegu at. So this is adding to, so you could say a story, tension. Okay, so give yourself a mark mas o 12. Gwych, I can see some people has managed to get full marks again in the chat. So da iawn o'r ddechog, keep working well at home. Okay, so here is an example of a past paper question. As you can see, this is mainly in, this is all in Welsh. Okay, so if you have a look, yn y dan isod, in the piece below, mae awdur yn defnyddio technegau fel. So in the piece below, the author uses techniques such as, and they've given you 3 techniques. Okay, so if you didn't know what the English meant, then you would struggle to answer these. So can anyone tell me, beth ydy Saesneg? Beth ydy cwestiynau rhethregol, ailadrodd, ymadroddion negyddol? Okay, gwych. Someone just typed in the chat, the cwestiynau rhethregol means rhetorical questions. So in the piece that you will be given, you'd have to look for rhetorical questions, okay, and quote any examples. Ailadrodd is, I can see someone in the chat has written repetition, Diane. And gwych, someone else just wrote in that ymdryddion negyddol are negative phrases, so anything negative in the text. So the exam board, this is just an example. The exam board may change the techniques, and the extract that we're looking at today is in the short story Pwy beth a fyddwn feddwl. So the story could change. So they would choose one of the stories, so it could be an extract from either story. So you need to also have knowledge of the story. Then it says, rhoi'ch enghraifft o technegau hyn. So give examples of these techniques. So we'll be going through, picking out examples in a few minutes. A gan dweud, sut ydyn ti'n teimlo ei bod yn effeithiol? So say if you feel that they are effective. So are they effective techniques? Are they not? So you need to explain to the examiner why that is effective. Ychwanegiant llwyddiant y stori a pham, and how does it add to the success of the story and why? So is it successful, maybe adding to the characters' emotions? Does it give a hint to the readers? How does it impact the readers? So you need to be thinking about all of these questions. So can anyone type in the chat for me? How could we respond to this question? Beth ydyn ni'n mynd I cynnwys? What are we going to include in our answers? Okay, so while you are typing, they suggest to write around 100 words in your responses, so it's not that much to write. The other question about the contents of the story would also expect the same amount, and this is worth 15 marks. Okay, someone just wrote in the chat that you need to point, evidence, and explain. So you as teachers might have given you a few examples on how to set up this work, but the main thing is introduce your point, introduce your quotes, give an example, explain the quote. So is it effective technique, and link to the question. Okay, so we will be going through a structure towards the end of the lesson. Okay, so remember, if you have any questions, just type in the chat if you have any. Okay, and this is the marking criteria that the examiners will be marking using to mark your work. Okay, so we are aiming for the highest marks. Okay, so 8 out of 10, you need a sound knowledge of the text and techniques. So that means you need to talk about the techniques in the question, only talk about the ones in the question, find examples using quotes from the text that they've given you, and also demonstrate an original and mature argument or opinion. Okay, so you need a sound knowledge, a really good understanding of the characters, the story, the plot, which I'm sure you've been going over in lessons, and it needs to be original argument. So it's pointless me giving you a model answer and you copying it. It needs to be your own individual interpretation of the text. Okay, so that's for the 10 marks. The other 5 marks are based on the expression of your writing. Okay, so are you creating a clear structure in your work? So the structure that we're going through today, which will hopefully give you a clear structure to hopefully access the higher marks. You need to be very in your registering style. So don't just say Rydw i'n hoffi. First of all, it's boring and you're not changing up your sentence patterns. You also need a firm grasp of grammar. So don't just, once you complete your work, read through your work, check for any mutation errors, check for maybe have you used a verb instead of a noun. Okay, so everything needs to be accurate as possible in order to attain the higher marks. Okay, does anyone have any questions? Okay. The reason why I'm not going over the lower criteria is because we are aiming for the higher ones today and in our exam. Okay, so here's a possible structure that you might want to include. So refer to 3 techniques in the questions only. So if the question says cwestiynau rhesregol, the examiner would not expect you to write a paragraph about trosiad. A metaphor, because you totally lose marks because you're not writing about the main techniques in the question. It's fine to say the verb shows something as part of your explanation. That's brilliant, but you need to maybe have 3 clear paragraphs about each of the techniques. Then you need to try enghraifft, give an example from the text only. Okay, so remember they are going to give you an example from the text, and that's what they want you to use in order for your answer. And finally, you need to write an explanation. The explanation that we're working on today is, do you feel that this technique is effective, and does it add to the success of the story and why? This could also change every single time. They might specifically ask about how does it impact the characters. It could be literally anything, but you need to make sure you are explaining why they are using this technique, how does it impact the story, how does it impact the reader, and link to the question. I would personally use the key question words in your answers. So I clearly write my question on your triangle so the examiner knows which technique you're talking about. I'd literally make sure I have the words mae hyn yn effeithiol, this is effective, mae hyn yn ychwanegu at llwyddiant. So remember, all of this question could change, it's just an example, but you need to make sure you're using the keywords in your responses as well. Okay, so here is an example which you could have on the day. So remember, the examiner may give you a snap of a piece of text from any of the 3 short stories, and your job would be to pick out examples, read the text, try and work out where this piece of information is in the story, and then form your responses. So your task today, I want you to chwiliwch am gwestiynau rhethregol, rhetorical questions, ailadrodd, repetition, ymadroddion negyddol, negative phrases. So I'm going to give you 3 minutes to try and search for some of the answers or some examples. So you might want to underline any examples of rhetorical questions. I'll give you a clue. Usually at the end of a rhetorical question is a question mark. Ailadrodd, can you see anything repeating? So this is from Pwy byth oedd byddwn fetal. Maybe you know already which sort of vocabulary is repeated throughout. Can we see any ymadroddion negyddol, any negative phrases throughout? And I also want you to have a think, where is this extract in the story? Does it become in the middle, in the end, at the beginning? What does it lead to? Maybe these techniques are giving a hint of what's going to happen further on in the story. Okay, so remember, type in the chat if you need any help with anything. If we say 1 minute, 1 more minute. Okay, can anyone tell me where is this in the story? Beth sy'n digwydd, what is happening here? Okay, great. Someone just typed in the chat that this is about in the middle of the story, which is correct. So what's going on here is that she's just had an electric shock going through her body from the peiriant cyflux Rex. And remember, towards the end of the story, he reveals himself that and that he knows that she's been unfaithful throughout the story. Okay, so this leads to a lot of more negative and quite angry remarks from the machine. Okay, so dyma'r atebion, you might have found different techniques yourself. So questionnaire rhethregol, rhetorical questions are in class today. Beth efo oed ti'n wneud? So what are you doing? Beth sy'n bod yma? What's happening here? So in a way, non can't really believe what's going on, and she's questioning the actions of the machine. Ailadrodd, repetition. So if you have a look, cenol, which is like get back, because the machine is taking control over non, and she wants to reinforce her authority. And again, it could also show that she's quite scared of the machine. And she says, symudwch. So these are, again, command words, telling them, or verbs, telling them to move. Ymadroddion negyddol are negative verb forms. So ymateb y peiriant dim, the machine didn't respond, which again, you're not sure, the character non isn't sure what the machine is doing. And symudwch y peiriant dim, so the machine didn't move, which again, datblygu tension, builds tension, because the machine is unpredictable. You're not really sure what they're doing, and is also not following instructions to what it's supposed to be doing as well. Okay, so again, the exam board could give another piece of extract from another story. They could also change the techniques, but in the exam, I'll just quickly go through. Can you pick out any examples? Remember, if you have not included any examples, your marks will go down as well. Okay, and this is a lot easier because you don't actually have to memorize this extract, because you know it's going to be coming up in the exam. Okay, so here is a possible structure that you could follow in the exam. Your teachers may have suggested another structure, that's fine, but this is the one that I would suggest you to use. Remember, in order to attain the higher marks in the exam, they would expect you to have a clear structure, okay? So first of all, I'd introduce your technique. So I would make it very clear which technique you are talking about. So you might want to set her out in 3 paragraphs to discuss every technique. If you don't mention the techniques, the examiner may not know which techniques you're discussing. And again, your marks could go down because it's unclear about your structure and what or which techniques you're using. So mae awdur yn defnyddio cwestiynau wrthygol. The author uses rhetorical questions. So that's nice and clear, showing which text you are discussing. Then you pick out examples from the text. So here are some examples of quotes from the text that you could have used. And again, you just go back, pick out all the different techniques. Okay, and there's the example, which again is accessing the higher marks. Then you need to think of the effect. So why is the author using techniques? So why is the author using rhetorical questions? So you might make the readers think, it might make the character think, it might build tension. So you need to maybe create an argument. Why is the author using this technique? And remember, your explanation would change depending on the question. So the question today, we're looking at, is the technique effective? So I'd say, mae hyn yn effeithiol, this is effective because, or dydy hyn ddim yn effeithiol, this isn't effective. So your explanation could change depending on the question. And you should always think in your explanation, how does it impact the readers? Does it make the readers think this technique? What maybe is given a hint towards what's happening at the end of the story, and how does it impact the story? So does it make create tension? Maybe is a romantic scene. Okay, and finally, as I've mentioned already, you need to link to the question. So as I suggested earlier, use the keywords from the question in the answers. So the ones today, effeithiol, llwyddiant story. But again, the question will change. So if you use the keywords from the question in the answer, it's clear to the examiner that you are answering the question, is a clear structure, and you should be able to gain higher access to the marks. So in this case today, the question was, is it successful? Does it add to the story? And if I clearly said, mae awdur yn llwyddiannus agos, then is clearly answering the question. Mae hyn yn ychwanegu ant y llwyddiant y story. This adds to the story achos because. And again, is a clear answer reusing the questions. And it also saves you work as well, because the words are there in front of you. You don't have to think of it yourself. You're just making sure you're reusing the keywords. Okay. Some people tend to just put P, but without linking to the question, and it doesn't give as much as a clear structure. Okay, so in front of us now, my enghraifft gyda ni, we have an example of just one paragraph of a response to this question. I didn't want to give you a full example because I want you to try and create your own example without physically copying mine. So what I want you to do for 3 minutes, I want you to darllenwch enghraifft, read the example, and I want to see if you can pick out any examples of techniques or quotes from the question. So remember, has this person used any quotes or examples from the piece? any examples of the effect or how effective is the technique. So maybe some useful phrases, maybe you could copy down some of the explanations. How does this quote impact the reader? And how does this impact the success of the story? So you might want to pick out any useful phrases to recycle for your own piece of work. And then I finally want you to think, what mark would you give this piece? Obviously, it's just a small text, and how could this be improved? So any good points about the text and anything how you could improve this piece of work. Okay, so if I give you 2 minutes, 2 more minutes. So remember, you're noting down any useful phrases to introduce quotes. Maybe they've given some examples which you could reuse in your own response. If you need any help with anything. Okay, 1 minute now, 1 more minute. So mae awdur yn defnyddio sawl techneg yn y darn sy'n effeithiol. So that recycled one of the sentence starters that we went over, and is a good introduction. So the author uses several techniques in the piece. Okay, so if we trafod rhai o syniadau now, some ideas, can anyone type in the chat any useful quotes or techniques that they have discussed in the text? Okay, gwych. Someone has pointed out that they have used the quote here, symudodd y peiriant ddim. So they have picked out quotes from the text. Again, that's to access the higher marks in the exam. So they're using points or quotes to support the answers. Gwych, someone has pointed out that they've used the phrase ymadroddion negyddol, so they've made it clear to the examiner which techniques they are discussing as well. Okay, can anyone type in any examples or phrases of how effective is the technique? And also, how does it impact the reader? Okay, gwych. Someone said, mae hyn yn effeithiol agos, mae'n dangos bod y peiriant yn rheoli sefyllfa. So this shows that this is affected because it shows that the machine controls the situation. So again, it's explaining whether the technique is effective, recycling some of the phrases from the question. And again, it shows knowledge of the story. It shows that the candidate knows the story, that the machine is controlling the situation. Okay. Can anyone tell me beth sy'n dda ymateb? What is good about the response, and sut ydyn ni'n gallu datblygu waith? How can we develop the work further? Yeah, gwych, Redwyn Cadino. Someone just wrote in that is a clear structure, and they've used appeal throughout. So they've used point, evidence, explain, and links to the question. Diane, that's the point there. Good point. Yeah, I can see now someone's just typed in that they could extend their work with some idioms, and someone just pointed out they could also talk about the other techniques in their responses. So remember, this is just a small example of your response. You'd be expected to write around 100 words, and this response here is just talking about one of the techniques. So it's just literally one paragraph. They'd expect you to also discuss the other two as well. Okay, gwych, Diane. So now, what I want you to do now is complete your own response. So I'm going to give you about 10 minutes, 5 minutes to have a go at your own response to this. Okay, so remember, in your responses, you need to trafod a technique. I talk about the 3 techniques. So you want to do one paragraph rhetorical questions, al-adrodd, repetition, ymadroddion negyddol, negative phrases. So remember, I'm not going to expect you to finish this throughout the session, but you might want to start with a paragraph now, and then once you have time, complete the full response, and you might want to send her on to your teachers. Okay, then remember, we need to give examples of techniques from the piece of extract. So the extract today is here. So we've already picked out our techniques. We just need to make sure we include them in our answers. Then we also need to answer the overall question. So remember the question today, rhowch enghreifftiau, give examples of these techniques, which hopefully we're doing from analysing the extract. Dweud, ydych chi'n ymdeimlo eu bod yn effeithiol? Say if these are effective. So remember, use the keywords in the answer. Mae hyn yn effeithiol achos, this is effective because. And remember, once you've done your explanation, you need to link to the question. So, sut mae hyn yn ychwanegu at llwyddiant y story? How does this add to the success of the story? There's nothing wrong with saying dydy hyn ddim yn ychwanegu at llwyddiant story. This doesn't add to the success of the. You need to explain why. And remember, you are also marked on your expression of your writing, so you need to make sure your grammar is accurate, is appropriate audience, is appropriate person. And these are the type of questions you need to be asking. How does it impact the reader? How does it impact the story? Why is the author using this technique? So there's a reason why the author uses these techniques in their responses. Okay, so remember, type in the chat if you have any questions. Okay, if we say 2 munud now, 2 more minutes. Okay, someone just wrote in the chat, can we write over 100 words? Yes, you can. And just be mindful of time in the exam because you have the synoptic question following this as well. But again, more detail the better. Okay, we just had another question come through. What are the other questions in this section of the paper? So in this section, remember, you'll have a question about the content of the story. So it could be maybe about the characters, it could be about relationships. Then they'll expect you to analyze the question. You would not be given an extract. It's only for this section here. And then finally, you will have a synoptic question, which we are discussing next time. Okay, and remember, throughout this lesson, feel free to go back throughout the text to look at the structure, the marking criteria, to make sure you have included all of the standards that you need for high standard answer or response. Okay, so as part of revision, there are a few resources that you could be using in your responses. So the WJC have some crash for your speaking exam, choice safety, which we went through last week. There's some grammar tasks which would be really useful for this section. So remember, 5 marks are based on the activities on there. in order to enhance the accuracy of your writing. Then this website here is a really useful resource for straeon and Byrion, which are short stories. So it gives some information about the content of the story, some information that you went over last year. So remember, some of the course from last year is still relevant, such as in this section, you can recycle some of the techniques that you revised last year in the poetry. And again, for the synoptic question, which we're going through next week, you'll want to hopefully use examples from the course in your responses. Okay, I've also created a revision table to help you. So you're just expressing your opinion in general, either maybe about the techniques, content, or you might want to recycle these for your synoptic question as well. So these are really useful phrases I would revise in preparation for revision as well. It's really useful to create your own as well, because I'm sure you have developed a lot of vocabulary over time. Okay. Session D. So remember, type in the chat if you have any questions. Okay, so our next session is going to be on Decline, the 28th of Vawd, and is starting at quarter wedi chwech, starting at 6:15 tan 7 o'clock until 7 o'clock. And the session that we'll be going over next week is based on your synoptic question. So your synoptic will be in Unit 6, and also you'll also have to discuss it as part of your Unit 4 speaking exam, which is hopefully coming up soon. So remember, these sessions are recorded, and you can watch them on the e-sgol website at any point. Pause, rewind if you missed anything. There's also a copy of the PowerPoints as well, if you want to revise the session again as we approach closer to the exams. Okay, so does anyone have any questions about anything? Okay, so just a reminder, you can go on to these links as well to revise some of the short stories. Okay, I just had a great question in the chat. How many words do we need to write for the content of the short stories? And again, that's also 100 words, such as the techniques section. Okay, so just a reminder, a copy of these sessions. This is the third session. So the first session was about based on grammar in the first section of Unit 6. The second section was based on Traws-Saethu, which is your Unit 5 exam. The one today was based on Unit 6. Okay, so remember to go onto the website, go back to anything from previous lessons, use it close to revision. And remember, the next section will be next Monday, same time again, 6:15 until 8 o'clock, until 7 o'clock. Okay, so diolch yn fawr and hwyl fawr.